You know, if there's one question I get asked more than any other, more even than if something is new, how can it be both new and improved? That question would have to be, Mark, is Lucky SHD100 the same terrible film you were using over a decade ago, or does the resolving power of this new and improved version also resolve that particular semantic paradox? Well, today we're going to try and answer that question. New and improved. We've all heard that promise from soft drinks to software. We just have to reflect on New Coke and Windows Vista to remember that not everything new is necessarily better and that improved is a subjective term. Well, if there was one product that genuinely needed improving though, it would be Lucky SHD100. You may have heard of Lucky Film before, but if you haven't, well, your life has probably been all the better for your ignorance. But Lucky, or Lucky in its transliterated pinyin, is unsurprisingly a Chinese manufacturer of film. They do love to bastardize their English names over there. From Mai Dang Lao to Xinba Ke, they have lots of borrowed words. So if you are a coffee or chocolate eating lesbian Nazi, you'll probably be able to find your way around Wuhan. Thank you, Wikipedia. And another filmic tidbit is that Lucky used to pump out Kodak Gold in the early 2000s until Kodak pulled out of the deal following the slump in film sales and the growth of digital. Lucky was still making film though, and in the early 2010s when I started getting my analog game back on, this was the cheapest film you could get, so I did buy it. I did manage to check my email history and found this order of 10 boxes of Lucky SHD100 for 37 Australian dollars. This is the film I would use to test new old cameras, and the results were crap. I mean really bad. Perhaps the fact that it was specifically promoted as a film for Holgers and Dianas was a hint here. It's not like the emulsion itself was horrible. I don't hate grain, and here there was just enough tonal range to give you nice contrast, but well, the results always seemed soft and clumpy and the highlights glowed like a Chernobyl school kid. And that's when the film actually worked. Sometimes you'd get spots and ripples, scratches and holes in the emulsion. It was like the spool had been machined off an old munitions factory, which maybe it was, since Lucky was producing everything from credit card magnetic strips to materials for the Chinese space industry. So let's just say that Lucky Film was always the one film I didn't trust. Actually, I have a fraught relationship with Fomapan too, but let's just keep this side of the Great Wall for now. After one particularly depressing experience of buying a block that looked like it had been re-rolled expired stock, I lumped Lucky in the basket of unlucky film experiences, and I tried to move on. Since then, the film fell off my radar, and I understand that they stopped producing this stock at some point, but in the last few years, Lucky has returned, and with a brand new formula. This is Lucky New SHD100, a film that has been promoted as having very fine grain, moderate contrast, high resolving power, a wide exposure latitude, and excellent highlight separation. Most of all, it has great forgiveness. Pretty much perfect then. Well, we all need forgiveness sometimes. For me, it's usually after the fact, and no doubt I'll be begging for yours by the end of this video. But it did happen that I was in Shanghai earlier this year, and I found it for sale. It's not the bargain it was once, but it immediately caught my eye in the way that an abuse victim might relive the trauma seeing their perpetrator in court. I was repelled, I was disgusted, I was fascinated, and I was nostalgic. I was in Shanghai, not Stockholm, but the syndrome was real, and I walked away with a roll like a guilty secret snuck into my shopping bag. Since then, it's been taunting me from the fridge, and I have actually taken it overseas with the intention of using it, and then realizing, do I really want to risk using this film to capture a once-in-a-lifetime experience? Well, its time arrived this week because it was a very boring Saturday. With the intention of giving this film its best chance, I loaded it into the best camera and lens combination I own, the Nikon F100 and 24-70 f2.8, a classic wedding kit to capture another once-in-a-lifetime experience. But I doubt any wedding photographer would be shooting with this stuff either. I just took it out walking in the local suburbs. Definitely not a once-in-a-lifetime experience, but hey, let's also hope it's not a traumatic one. And look, while I was down there, I figured, hey, is this not the perfect time and place to test the latitude of this film? So I scooted around to these submerged tree stumps and I tried to take shots of the same thing at different exposures. Okay, so for the record, I shot it first at box speed, then I shot it 1 stop under, then I shot it 2 stops under, and then finally I shot it 2 stops over. And we'll see what the latitude of this film is. So let's look at the results in Lightroom, and firstly, this is not the Lucky I knew and hated 12 years ago. Let's give it that straight away. The results aren't horrible, and that in itself is a win. I'll talk about all of the other properties of the film later, but if you look at these 4 photos, what you have is a usable image pretty much across all of them. Now that's not to say that Lucky SHD100 was a terrible film anyway in terms of its dynamic range. Even back then, it had more latitude than some other monochrome abominations. And yes, I'm looking at you, Japan Camera Hunter. It's films like JCH Street Pan 400 that give the repurposed film stocks a bad name. Basically, taking traffic surveillance film and selling it as some hipster stock that'll transform you into Henri Cartier-Bresson is perhaps a bit disingenuous. Though to be fair, in the right conditions, even some of the most contrasty film can look great. This isn't that contrasty though, and it's not exactly Ilford FP4 either. One of the things that became very apparent here is that it managed 2 stops of over and under exposure well enough, but the big surprise was how well it fared with the underexposure. Black and white film is usually okay 1 or 2 stops under, but if you take the 4 images and then adjust the exposure to equalize things, well, in the end, the underexposed images both look very usable. What you notice is that there's a definite increase in grain, and also underexposed film tends to show the artifacts and imperfections in the emulsion more obviously, those spots and scratches. That's true here, but what I'm not losing is too much of the shadow detail. Even 2 stops under, there's enough there to tell the story of the tree rings and bark. Now, of course, this is not in any way a scientific test. None of this double-blind experimental design stuff. I just shot 4 photos at different exposures and developed the roll according to the box speed, or at least what I was able to get out of the massive dev chart, since the box is actually all in Chinese. I developed it for 14 minutes and 14 seconds in XTOL diluted 1:1 with distilled water, which is a long time, but I was compensating for the 15-degree room temperature we have here in winter. I think the development was pretty good overall. Plenty of density in the film negative, but still not soup so long that I couldn't see my finger through the film leader against the light. All things being equal, literally in the sense of equalizing out the exposures in Lightroom, then it's clear that this is a stock that can handle a bit of underexposure. What is surprising is what it's done with the highlights when overexposed. 2 stops over and it just evolves into a creamy swirl. The detail is gone and you're left with a lot of data at the top of the histogram. Now, I'm not going to go so far as to say that the highlights blocked up. There's not much grain when you try to retrieve the detail. It's more that the detail is just so compressed in the highlights that there's not much of anything there. So this is a film with enough detail in the toe of the contrast curve, but a long shoulder in the lighter areas. Well, I'm very broad-shouldered and I can handle it, but it does tend to buck against the received wisdom around it being always better to overexpose your film or expose for the shadows. Like I said, highly unscientific, and I'm not well versed in sensitometry. Maybe the more sensitive ones of you out there can help enhance our empathy for film density. But let's just enjoy the remainder of the roll for now, and we'll get a little bit more forensic once we've finished it. So this is not the old Lucky, even though that Lucky was still called Lucky New. This is Lucky Newer, and therefore a much luckier prospect for the aspiring photographer. Digging up my old original negatives, because that's the OCD guy I am, you can see one immediate similarity and one immediate difference. Honestly, when I loaded it into the camera, I wasn't feeling confident. The material feels thin, and apparently this new, nearly transparent polyester base is also thinner than the original. I didn't measure it, and the older stuff may have been equally insubstantial, but this latest roll did at least have edge markings compared to the anonymous negatives of the older stock. While both use a transparent polyester base, the latest version is supposedly reformulated to reduce curl, and I have to say that it wasn't a problem here. It's also supposed to provide better anti-halation properties. Now, in case you're not aware of what halation is, it's that glowing that you get in the highlights caused by the light passing through the film and reflecting off the back of the camera. It's not really considered desirable, and most films have an anti-halation layer to minimize it, but my original film photos have halation in spades. Like here and here. Looking at this latest batch of Lucky, and where is the specular bloom? Even shooting directly into the sun, the film manages to maintain some defined edges around the leaves. It also shows that stock down, the Nikon 24-70 f2.8 struggles to make sun stars, though the coatings do handle flare quite well. But I digress. We're not here to review lenses today. We're here to talk film, and Lucky Film is proving to be a pleasant surprise. Whether this has an anti-halation layer or not, the film base seems to be playing ball. If you look at the light piping around the sprocket holes, you can see that this clear film base is acting like a prism internally, even if it's effectively managing surface reflections. While the China Lucky Film Corporation has been producing photosensitive materials out of Baoding in China since 1958, Lucky Film itself is a newly formed company that started operations early in 2017, and it's this offshoot company that is responsible for this new Lucky, though it does look like the film itself is being produced out of the same original plant. Confused yet? I am, and it's made complicated by the fact that Lucky are about to release a new colour film onto the market after a 10-year hiatus. Sticking with the comforting minimalism of black and white film though, and let's try and select 6 lucky citizens from the photographic proletariat. These loyal comrades are waving the flag for Lucky Film and deserve a place in my little red photo album. Though really, this was not an inspirational photo walk. You can tell the minute I start populating my feed with photos of cats and dogs that I'm relying on cuteness rather than composition, and trying to mitigate for the fact that a few pictures of tree stumps and suburban streets aren't really going to provide any great leap forward photographically. Rather, a notch and a misstep on the Belton Road of my creative endeavours. If ever there is evidence that I'm no Henri Cartier-Bresson, these are the compelling closing arguments. As for the case of Lucky though, well, that's wide open. The jury hasn't reached a verdict yet, but I'm leaning towards, if not innocence then, a commuted sentence for good behaviour. What was probably a case of finishing off the dog ends of expired stock and the dubious quality control of the previous version did cloud my judgment, but I'm now done with my struggle sessions with Lucky Film. I have been re-educated and can now publicly acknowledge that Lucky may just be a legitimate option for a serious photographer. And why not? We all like to think we're intentional with our craft, but even Bresson acknowledged that his iconic photograph of that other great leap forward, a photo taken behind the Gare Saint-Lazare, was actually shot blind through a gap in the planking, and he didn't even know what he had until he developed it. So there's nothing wrong with getting lucky, but what do you think? Now that you have made it this far, don't forget to like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and everything else that lets me foist myself onto your feed. But most importantly, tell me what you think of Lucky SHD100. It's new and improved, but not as cheap as it used to be, and really, unless I can find bulk rolls for cheaper than Kentmere 100, I'm not likely to use it every day myself. But have you used it? If not, are you tempted? This has had a checkered past, but now this film is reformed and ready to hit the shelves in black and white, and soon even in colour. So ask yourself, are you feeling lucky? Let me know in the comments, because as Bresson himself said,
Non, mais c'est tout le temps la chance, il n'y a que ça. Il n'y a que la chance qui compte. Il faut être disponible, c'est tout.
Later.